My best friend, the woman I chose as my daughter's godmother, is the person who convinced a judge to take her away from me. I'm holding the secret letter she wrote, and every word is a perfectly aimed lie designed to ruin me. My eyes scanned the page, her familiar loopy handwriting, twisting the truth into a weapon. The nights of heavy drinking, she mentioned? That was the single evening she came over with a bottle of Merlot to console me after my husband Mark left, pouring me a second glass herself while I sobbed. The reliance on sleeping pills? My doctor's prescription for stress-induced insomnia, a prescription Chloe herself had picked up from the pharmacy for me because I was too distraught to go out. The moments she'd stepped in because I was too overwhelmed to provide adequate care. That was the time I had a stomach flu so severe I could barely stand, and I had called her, my so-called sister, begging her to watch Lily for a single afternoon. She had taken my vulnerability, my trust, every desperate, tearful confession I had made to her in the sanctity of our friendship, and she had polished it, sharpened it, and handed it to the court. She had painted a picture of an unstable, unfit mother, and she had signed her name to it with a flourish. My breath hitched. The room began to spin, the edges of my vision blurring into a dark tunnel. I was on my feet, the paper crushed in my fist. I stumbled toward the kitchen, my hand shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. I found her name, the picture of us smiling, arms thrown around each other on a beach vacation, and I pressed call. She answered on the second ring, her voice infuriatingly cheerful. "Hey, you!" I was just thinking about you. The sound of her normalcy was like a physical shock. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat was a knot of glass shards. "Scarlett? You there?" "I have the letter, Chloe," I finally managed to rasp out, the words raw and broken. Silence. Not a confused silence, but a heavy, guilty one. The kind of silence that confirms everything. What letter?" she stammered, the cheerfulness vaporizing. "The one you gave to the evaluator," I said, my voice rising, cracking with a pain so profound it felt like it was splitting me in two. "The one where you tell them I'm an unstable, pill-popping alcoholic who can't take care of her own daughter. That letter. Oh, Scarlett." "It wasn't like that," she began, her voice taking on a soothing, condescending tone she must use with her therapy or clients. "You were in a bad place. I was worried. I had to be honest." "Honest?" I shrieked, the sound tearing from my lungs. "Honest? You told them I was a danger to my own child. You took every moment I confided in you, every time I leaned on you, and you twisted it into this monstrous lie. They took my daughter away from me, Chloe. They read your words, the words of my best friend, and they decided I was unfit. You did this. You did this to me." I was sobbing now. Great, heaving, ugly cries that left me breathless. The betrayal was a living thing, coiling in my gut, squeezing the air from my chest. My daughter, my sweet, funny, beautiful Lily, with her mismatched socks and her fierce love for dinosaurs. I only saw her on supervised visits now, twice a week in a sterile room with a stranger watching us, all because the one person I thought I could trust had driven the knife into my back and then helped my ex-husband twist it. "I did it for Lily," Chloe said, her voice small but firm, dripping with a self-righteousness that set my teeth on edge. I truly believed it was in her best interest. The line went dead. I don't know if she hung up or if I did. I collapsed onto the cold kitchen floor, the crumpled paper still clutched in my hand, and I howled. My world, already fractured, had just been pulverized into dust. But how did we get here? How does a friendship that was the bedrock of your life become the architect of its ruin? Let's start from the beginning. Chloe and I met in college, two scared freshmen clinging to each other in the chaos of orientation week. We were an unlikely pair. I was studying literature, lost in poetry and romantic ideals. She was in psychology, fascinated by the mechanics of the human mind, logical and pragmatic where I was emotional and impulsive. But it worked. We were the yin to each other's yang. She was the one who talked me out of bad decisions, and I was the one who convinced her to occasionally make them. We navigated heartbreaks, celebrated triumphs, and shared a tiny, overpriced apartment after graduation. When I met Mark, she was my steadfast champion. When he proposed, she was the one who held up the ring to the light, squealing with a joy that mirrored my own. She was my maid of honor, her speech a perfect tear-jerking tribute to our bond. Our friendship was, for 15 years, the most stable relationship in my life. It was a given, an unshakable truth. When I found out I was pregnant with Lily, Chloe was the first person I told after Mark. She threw me a baby shower that was the stuff of legends. She was in the delivery room, a calming presence in the storm, cutting the umbilical cord with a surgeon's steady hand when Mark felt faint. She was Auntie Chloe, the one who could always make Lily giggle, the one who knew exactly which bedtime story was the favorite of the week. My marriage to Mark, however, was not as stable. The love that had once felt so epic began to fray at the edges, worn down by the mundane pressures of life, by mismatched expectations, and the slow, corrosive drip of resentment. I confided everything in Chloe. I told her about the fights, the silences, the growing chasm between Mark and me. She was my sounding board, my confidant. She would listen patiently, nodding, offering advice that always seemed so wise and measured. "You need to prioritize your own well-being, Scarlett," she'd say. "You can't pour from an empty cup." When Mark finally said the words, "I don't think I love you anymore," it was Chloe's shoulder I cried on. It was her apartment I escaped to when the house felt too suffocatingly empty. She was my rock, my constant, the one person who saw my pain in its rawest form. I was a wreck. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I'd call her in the middle of the night, my voice thick with tears and panic, and she would always answer. I told her my deepest fears, that I was a failure, that I had ruined everything, that I wouldn't be able to handle being a single mother. I trusted her with my broken pieces. I never imagined she was carefully collecting them to build a case against me. The custody battle started amicably enough. Mark and I agreed to 50-50. It seemed fair, civilized even. But then, something shifted. Mark's lawyers became more aggressive. Whispers started about my emotional instability. I was blindsided. My lawyer warned me that they were trying to paint me as an unfit parent. I laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound. Me? Unfit? My entire world revolved around Lily. She was the sun I orbited, the reason I got out of bed every morning. The court ordered a custody evaluation. It was a humiliating process. A stranger picking through the fabric of my life, my home, my parenting. I was a bundle of nerves, anxious and defensive. The evaluator asked for character references. I put Chloe's name at the top of the list without a second's hesitation. "She knows me better than anyone," I told the evaluator, my voice filled with confidence. "She's seen me with Lily since the day she was born. She'll tell you everything." Oh, and she did. Looking back now, the signs were there, tiny red flags I'd dismissed as products of my own paranoia. There was the time Chloe had offered to take Lily for the weekend, saying, "You look exhausted, Scarlett. You need a real break. Let me have her." At the time, I'd been flooded with gratitude. Now I saw it for what it was, evidence gathering. She was creating a narrative where I was perpetually overwhelmed. There was the conversation we had a week before she submitted her statement. I was agonizing over the evaluation, terrified they would misinterpret my grief as a personality flaw. "Don't worry," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "I'll just be honest. I'll tell them what a wonderful, loving mother you are, but also that you've been under an immense amount of stress. It's important to be truthful." The way she said it, it felt off, a little too rehearsed, but I pushed the feeling down. This was Chloe. She was on my side. Her betrayal was so insidious because it was cloaked in the language of concern. She didn't invent wild accusations. She simply took the mundane, painful realities of my divorce and my grief and reframed them through the clinical, damning lens of her profession. I was no longer a heartbroken woman struggling to stay afloat. I was a case study in emotional dysregulation. My exhaustion wasn't a normal reaction to trauma. It was a symptom of incapacity. My trust in her was the rope I had used to hang myself. The day the verdict came in was the worst day of my life. The judge read the decision in a flat, dispassionate voice. He cited concerns about my emotional stability and unpredictable behavior, awarding Mark primary physical custody. He directly referenced the compelling testimony from a close personal friend, noting that this friend, a professional in the mental health field, had expressed sincere and credible reservations. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. I looked over at Mark, who had the decency to look slightly ashamed, avoiding my gaze. My lawyer put a hand on my arm, but I barely felt it. All I could think was, who? Who would do this? I ran through the list of our mutual friends, my mind racing in panicked circles. Not once, not for a single, solitary second, did it land on Chloe. When I called her later that day, sobbing and incoherent, she had been the one to comfort me. "I'm so sorry, honey," she'd murmured, her voice thick with what I thought was sympathy. "It's a travesty. It's an injustice. We'll fight this." We. She had used the word we. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it still left me reeling. She had sat there, on the other end of the phone, listening to the agony she had personally orchestrated. She had played the part of the supportive friend while holding the bloody knife. Days bled into a week. I didn't leave my apartment. The blinds were drawn, the silence in the house a physical weight. Lily's room was a museum I couldn't bear to visit, its door a constant, painful reminder of the laughter that no longer filled my home. The initial explosive rage I'd felt after that final phone call with Chloe had cooled, hardening into something heavier and colder. It was a solid mass of grief and fury lodged in my chest. My mind became a courtroom of its own, replaying every moment of the last 15 years. Every shared secret, every knowing glance, every "I've got your back." Was it all a lie? Had this vein of jealousy and judgment been running beneath the surface all along? Or was it a recent development, a monstrous ideology that had taken root in the fertile ground of my divorce? I thought about her career. Chloe was a rising star at a prestigious family therapy practice. She specialized in high-conflict divorces and child welfare cases. People paid her hundreds of dollars an hour to pass judgment on their families, to give her professional, objective opinion. The hypocrisy was a physical nausea. She had built her professional reputation on the very principles of trust, confidentiality, and empathy that she had so flagrantly violated in her personal life. She counseled parents on how to navigate the trauma of custody battles, all while she was actively, secretly, ensuring I lost mine. What was I supposed to do with this information, this soul-shattering truth? Part of me, the exhausted, broken part, just wanted to curl up and disappear, to let it go, to focus on the meager scraps of my life that remained. What good would come from fighting? It wouldn't bring Lily back. The court's decision was final. A new legal battle would be expensive, draining, and likely fruitless. Exposing Chloe would just be revenge. And what was I, a vengeful person? I'd always thought of revenge as a hot, messy, passionate act, but the feelings swirling inside me were anything but. They were cold, precise, and utterly clear. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the other families, the other vulnerable, desperate people who sat in her tastefully decorated office, pouring out their hearts, trusting her to be an arbiter of fairness. She was a fraud, a dangerous one. She wielded her professional credentials like a weapon, cloaking her personal biases in the language of therapeutic concern. The internal debate raged. One moment, I'd be drafting furious emails in my head, imagining the look on her face as her world came crashing down. The next, I'd be flooded with a wave of despair, the sheer pointlessness of it all washing over me. Destroying her wouldn't fix me. It wouldn't fill the cavernous hole in my life where my daughter used to be. It might even make things worse, creating a public spectacle that could further impact Lily. But then, I would think of Lily's face during our last supervised visit, the confusion in her eyes when the monitor told her our time was up. "Why can't I come home with you, Mommy?" she had asked, her little voice so full of hurt. And I had no answer for her, no real answer. Because the real answer was, because my best friend, your Auntie Chloe, decided I wasn't good enough for you. That thought was the one that tipped the scales. It wasn't about what I wanted anymore. It was about justice. It was about consequence. Chloe had acted without consequence, hidden behind the shield of our friendship and her professional standing. She had passed a devastating judgment on my life, my character, my motherhood. She had appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner, and she had done it all with a sympathetic smile. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a steely resolve. She couldn't be allowed to get away with it. She couldn't be allowed to continue practicing, to hold the fate of other families in her hands. The moral conflict wasn't about whether I should take action. It was about whether I could live with myself if I didn't. And the answer, I realized with chilling clarity, was no. I couldn't. My silence would be a form of complicity. It would validate her belief that she had done the right thing, that her judgment was sound. My decision wasn't born of rage. It was a conclusion reached after a long, agonizing deliberation. It felt less like a choice and more like a necessity. She had destroyed my career as a mother. It was only fitting that I destroy hers. The plan took shape not in a flurry of emotion, but in the quiet, methodical way one might assemble a piece of furniture. It required careful thought and precision. A screaming match or a series of angry text messages would be useless, easily dismissed as the hysterics of a disgruntled friend. This had to be clinical, professional. I had to use her world, her rules, against her. My first step was to get a clean copy of the character statement. The one I had was crushed and tear-stained. I emailed my lawyer a simple detached request for a digital copy of Exhibit C-4 from the custody evaluation file. He sent it over without question. Seeing it on my computer screen, a clean PDF, made it seem even more damning. The words were cold, calculated, and stripped of the loopy, friendly handwriting. Next, I spent hours online, not on social media, but on the websites for the state's Board of Behavioral Sciences and the professional organizations Chloe belonged to. I downloaded their codes of ethics, their official complaint forms. I read through sections on dual relationships, conflicts of interest, and professional misconduct. It was all there, in stark, unambiguous language. A therapist should not engage in dual relationships that could impair their professional judgment. They must not exploit the trust of others. They must maintain objectivity. Chloe hadn't just bent the rules, she had shattered them. She had used information gained through her role as my friend and confidant, and presented it under the implicit authority of her professional role as a therapist. She had leveraged my trust to create a biased, damaging, and unofficial psychological assessment, and delivered it to a legal authority. It was a profound ethical breach. With the cold, hard language of the ethics code as my guide, I began to write. I drafted a formal complaint to the licensing board. I did not fill it with emotion or accusations of betrayal. I was meticulous, factual, and dispassionate. I was Scarlett, the complainant, and Chloe, the licensee. I detailed our long-standing personal relationship. I then detailed the specific, distorted claims made in her statement and contrasted them with the actual events, providing context she had conveniently omitted. I attached a copy of her statement as Exhibit A. I quoted the specific ethical codes she had violated, section by section. My tone was that of a concerned citizen reporting a serious, professional lapse. It was devastatingly effective. But I wasn't done. The licensing board process could be slow, confidential. I needed a more immediate, more public consequence. Chloe's firm prided itself on its unimpeachable reputation. They were the gold standard in family therapy in our city. I found the email addresses of the 2 senior partners on their website. I created a new anonymous email address. To these partners, I wrote a different kind of letter. This one was shorter, sharper. I introduced myself as a former friend of Chloe's who had been the victim of a severe ethical breach. I wrote, "I believe an employee's character in their personal life is a direct reflection of their professional integrity." Ms. Chloe's last name used her professional credentials to lend weight to a personal vendetta in a sensitive legal proceeding, directly resulting in a mother losing custody of her child. I believe this constitutes behavior unbecoming of a therapist and a serious liability to your firm's reputation. I attached the same statement from the court file. I didn't threaten. I didn't demand. I simply presented the information and let it speak for itself. The personal toll of this process was immense. For 3 straight days, I barely ate. I felt like a ghost in my own apartment, haunted by the woman I was becoming. Was this me? A cold, calculating woman, plotting the destruction of someone who was once my family? Each sentence I wrote felt like a betrayal of the person I used to be. The guilt was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my resolve. I felt sullied, stained by the act. But every time I faltered, every time I thought of deleting the drafts, the image of Lily's confused face would flash in my mind, and my fingers would return to the keyboard. When both documents were perfect, I sat in front of my laptop for a full hour, the cursor blinking over the send button. This was the final step, the point of no return. It was one thing to feel betrayed, to feel anger. It was another thing entirely to act on it in such a final, destructive way. A part of me screamed in protest, mourning the friendship that was, mourning the person I had been who would never have been capable of this. Then I thought of Chloe's voice on the phone. I did it for Lily. I truly believed it was in her best interest. Her arrogance, her certainty, her complete and utter refusal to acknowledge the devastation she had wrought. My finger clicked the mouse, first on the email to the licensing board, then on the one to the partners. The messages disappeared into the ether. I closed the laptop. The silence in the room was absolute. I had detonated the bomb. Now all I could do was wait for the fallout. The first explosion was a text message from Chloe, less than 24 hours after I'd sent the emails. My boss just called me into his office. What did you do? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't reply. An hour later, my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A message notification popped up immediately. Her voice, when I played it back, was a frantic, ragged whisper. "Scarlett, call me, please. We need to talk about this. You don't understand what you've done. This is my career, my entire life. Just call me." I deleted the message. The next day, the real storm hit. A call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. It was one of the senior partners from Chloe's firm. His voice was grave, formal. He wanted to thank me for bringing a serious matter to their attention and to assure me they were taking it very seriously. He informed me that Chloe had been placed on immediate, indefinite administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. I hung up the phone, a strange, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. There was no triumph, no surge of satisfaction, just a quiet, empty ache. It was real. I had done it. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the state licensing board. It was a form letter, acknowledging receipt of my complaint and informing me that a formal investigation into the licensee had been opened. They enclosed a copy of Chloe's official response. It was a mess of justifications and deflections. She claimed she had acted not as a therapist, but as a private citizen. She argued that her friendship with me gave her a unique insight, and that her only motive was concern for the child's welfare. She painted me as an unstable, vengeful woman who was now lashing out because she had lost her custody case. Reading her words, I felt a flicker of the old rage, but it was quickly extinguished. It didn't matter anymore. The wheels were in motion, and her denials were weak, transparent. The evidence, her own signed statement to the court, was irrefutable. The fallout rippled through our shared social circles. Friends called, confused. They had heard Chloe was taking a leave of absence from work. They had heard she was going through something. She was spinning a story of personal crisis, and I refused to engage. When people asked, I simply said, "Chloe and I are no longer friends," and left it at that. The ambiguity was its own kind of damnation. Then came the final call from Chloe. I don't know why I answered. Maybe I felt I owed her one last conversation. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its therapeutic calm, all its self-righteous certainty. It was the voice of someone who had hit rock bottom. "They're going to revoke my license," she sobbed, her words punctuated by choked breaths. "My career is over. Everything I've worked for my entire life. It's gone. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" I was silent for a long moment, listening to her unravel. I searched within myself for a feeling of victory, of vindication. I found nothing. What I wanted, Chloe, I said, my voice as cold and empty as I felt, was my daughter. You took that from me. You judged me, you condemned me, and you never once looked back. You built your life on being a person who helps families, but you destroyed mine. This isn't what makes me happy. Nothing about this makes me happy. This is just the consequence. I hung up before she could reply. I blocked her number. It was the last time I ever heard her voice. Did I feel satisfied? Number. Did I regret it? Number. The anger was gone. The rage had burned itself out. In its place was just a vast, profound sadness. I had won the war, but it hadn't changed the outcome of the battle that mattered. Lily was still with Mark. I still only saw her twice a week. The ticking clock in the supervised visitation center, the soundtrack to our strained, artificial time together. My revenge hadn't healed the wound. It had simply cauterized it, leaving behind a hard, ugly scar where my friendship and my old life used to be. 6 months have passed. The dust has settled into a new, bleak landscape. Through the grapevine, I heard that Chloe's license was suspended for 2 years, with a recommendation for permanent revocation. She had to undergo mandatory therapy and ethics retraining. Her firm fired her. Her name, once synonymous with professional integrity, was now a cautionary tale. She sold her apartment and moved out of state, disgraced and broken. My life, too, is a quiet affair. The gaping hole of Lily's daily absence has not shrunk. I've learned to live around it, like a city built around a crater. My weekends are silent. My evenings are long. I am rebuilding, but the foundation is cracked. I go to work. I pay my bills. I see my daughter in a sterile room filled with worn-out toys. I watch her grow up in snapshots, in 2-hour increments. Sometimes, in the dead of night, the question still haunts me. AITA? Was I right to destroy her? There is no easy answer. The revenge I enacted was total and devastating. It did not bring me joy. It did not bring me peace. It did not bring my daughter home. It was an act of demolition, and I am still living in the rubble. But then I think about what she did, the calculated nature of her betrayal, the profound abuse of trust. She judged me unworthy of my own child and acted on that judgment with the full, hidden weight of her professional authority. She did it secretly, while smiling to my face and comforting me in my grief. My action was not about happiness. It was about accountability. It was about taking the power back in a situation where I had been rendered utterly powerless. She had written the ending to my story as a mother. I took it upon myself to write the ending to hers as a therapist. It was a grim, hollow victory, a balancing of the scales that left both sides shattered. I don't know if what I did was right in a moral, universal sense, but it was necessary. It was the only way I could live with the wreckage she had made of my life. It was a final, desperate act of self-preservation. I lost my best friend. I lost the daily joy of raising my daughter. I lost a version of myself I can never get back. There is no closure, not really. There is only the quiet, enduring truth of what was lost, and the cold, hard fact of the price she was made to pay. And somehow, in this new, broken world, that has to be enough.